Welcome to Journey from Jacob. From our first breath to our last heartbeat, we are all on a journey. Jacob was a biblical character whose journey is documented for our benefit. Like all of us, there were unforgettable moments along the way which required decisiveness. One of those decisions determined his destination. We will not only discuss Jacob's journey, but Israel's as well, right up to date. May this podcast inspire you to make choices along your way that will benefit others and guide you to the destination we all long for.
Shalom Mishpacha, this is Paul here again. Journey from Jacob is a podcast production of Comfort My People. Word about Comfort My People. We are a ministry, we support ministries in Israel that are sharing the gospel with their people. They're a very small minority, and they just love our help. And it's not a financial love, but it's a love because we support what they're doing. We believe in what they're doing, and they're doing a great work. And if you're a believer, these are your brothers and sisters that they would sure welcome your assistance, and we could do that for you if you desire. So if you're finding any kind of meaningfulness about these podcasts and other things that we do, that, consider that. We don't ask for money. We don't beg for money. And it's not for our own sake. It's a kingdom process. And we just invite you to be a part of that. If it's valuable, if this is a blessing, this is our intention to be a blessing, according to Genesis 12, that you in turn would become a blessing and bless others the same way. Gospel would spread that way because it's attractive, it's meaningful. And so these podcasts are intended to be not just formative, informative, but meaningful to you, meaningful to those around you, and in your ministry and your calling, because this is something that we do together. Biachad is a word we use, a term we use frequently. It means together. Together, Jews and Gentiles can bring the message of the kingdom to the demonic world as an assault against what they're doing to prevent God's work in God's kingdom. So these things are big, but hopefully you'll see this big picture as we proceed on this journey, because it's a journey we invite you to take with us. We're all on it, and together we can do great exploits. So we've been going through the lives of Jacob, starting with Jacob, actually. We went back to Abraham, and we're going to kind of continue with Abraham. And this is more of a transition where we come to Isaac, and then towards the end, I want to share a little bit of a personal perspective from that. But I want to repeat something that is intended to be repeated, and that's the verse in Exodus chapter 3 when God first introduces himself to Moses, and he says to say this to the people of Israel. When he first encounters them, he's to say that the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations. So this is what we are called to as believers, to remind the generation that is emerging that God, the God of the universe, is the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. He's a personal God, and he intends to maintain that perspective that initially he opens himself up by revelation to Abraham, and then it continues on to Isaac and Jacob. And you're going to see that progression hopefully a little bit this time. But that's something to remember. It's to be the name he wants to be remembered throughout all generations. It's not even a suggestion. It's a command. In going back now to Genesis 18, we looked at this concept of laughter and where it began, and how Isaac's name was laughter. Literally Yitzchak means he laughs, but the root word is laughter. And we're going to see it in another form in this episode. So he says this in verse 19, chapter 18, "For I have chosen him," meaning Abraham, "that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord, by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has promised him." Now, the setting is that God and two angels came to visit him and have not just a meal, but a conversation, because God came to earth in the form of a man. So this is a theophany. It's not God Almighty. This gets confusing, obviously. To me, it's very clearly Jesus appearing in the Old Testament. They call it a theophany. but it's a personal visit, and God does not appear as the most holy guy, El Elyon, El Shaddai, or any of these other emanations of God in different ways. He has many names, but he's a triune God. So he shows up, and this is what he says. He wants to show Abraham, by doing righteousness and justice, that he will reveal to him what he has promised him. So God's preparing the way for Abraham's message, which is the blessing, that's his message, to begin to unfold on the earth. But first he has to eliminate some of his enemies, and some of them was vile, and the most vile depiction of humanity, polluted thoroughly by Satan, who showed up previously as the king of Sodom. So they are about to have this meal, but then from the meal, they're going to check out Sodom because it's just the stench of its wickedness has gone up to God. And because of the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah, it is great, and their sin is very great. God is on his way to visit them with judgment. So in verse 24, it begins Abraham's bargaining for the sin of Sodom. He's an intercessor. His nephew, remember, Lot and his family live there in Sodom, and he doesn't want to see them be destroyed with it. So he begins this somewhat of a bargaining conversation with God. And he says this in verse 25. Well, he starts with speaking to God. He says, if there's 50 righteous, would you spare them? And then God says, no, of course not. No, I won't. And then he says, well, what about 45? And then he keeps bargaining down to 10 and then stops bargaining. And he's almost embarrassed that he took so long. But he said, for 10 righteous, will you spare them? And God says, I will spare them if it is 10 righteous. So in verse 25, when the bargaining begins, Abraham develops this conversation by speaking about God's nature. So he says, far be it from you to do such a thing, to put the righteous to death with the wicked, so that the righteous fare as the wicked. Far be it that from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is right, or do what is just? I love this verse because there's a principle that's underlying here that's foundational to our lives as believers, that yes, the judge of the whole earth will always do what is right, will always do what is just, because he is the definition of righteousness. And when we follow him, Jesus actually becomes righteousness for us. So it becomes a part of our makeup and our behavior. But it also comes a way that we could lean on God's understanding that we don't have. It's an easier way of trusting him because we know that by his character, he will do nothing apart from doing it justly, righteous. Whatever he does is right. So Abraham leans on God's character, the one he has learned from through relationship building, not just the revelation of his word, which is coming very slowly at this point, but by his character, Abraham's coming to know God by his nature, and he's just totally drawn to him and bows down before him. But yet he feels confident enough to draw near to him and build this friendship. Abraham was called the friend of God. So we know the rest of the story. Sodom is destroyed. Lot's wife and 2 daughters leave with him. That's it. The sons did not come. The son-in-laws did not come because they didn't really take Lot seriously. They thought he was joking. But so Lot's life, even though he's called righteous in the New Testament, it just seemed like he was very ineffective in making a difference. But he chose to live there, remember. God told Abraham that, look, all this land, he took Abraham up on this hill, said, this land's all yours. But they had become so big, Abraham and Lot, when they left Egypt, they had so much livestock that they split up. And Abraham gave Lot his choice, where do you want to go? And he chose the valley where Sodom and Gomorrah were because it looked so lush and precious, and it was a really bad decision. So what happens? They leave Sodom. Lot's wife longingly looks back to her homeland and turns into a pillar of salt. And Lot ends up fathering 2 sons from his 2 daughters, and their descendants become the Moabites and the Ammonites, enemies of Israel forever. And this is a product of self-serving decision. This is a consequence of the self-serving decision of Lot to live comfortably even though it was amongst the Sodomites, and even though he made very little effect on their culture. So then we move forward, and we're going to come back to Sarah. And Sarah, remember, laughed. Abraham laughed, but God said, you're going to have this child, and that's when Sarah laughed, and you're going to call his name Isaac. So now, we've gone on in the story, And we come back to Sarah, and she has had her son. And Sarah said, God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh over me. So laughter is a good thing. Laughter isn't something that God is angry at. Laughter is very healthy. He's the one that brought it into the world. It was the first sign of the Abrahamic covenant that he was bringing laughter into the world. Why? Because we need it. We need it, and God knows it, and he provides all our needs. So then the child, Isaac, grew, and he was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. But in verse 9 of chapter 21, it says, Sarah saw the son of Hagar. Remember Hagar? She's the one that Sarah suggested that Abraham have a son with because she was still barren. But now Hagar is still with them. Ishmael is grown up there, and he's about 12 years old. And Sarah saw the son of Hagar, which would be Ishmael, the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, laughing. But now laughing takes on a different form. It's not Yitzchak, I think it's Mitzchak, which could easily be interpreted as mocking, a different kind of laughter. So she sees this, she's upset. She says to Abraham, cast out this slave woman with her son, for the son of this slave woman shall not be heir with my son Isaac. Now, little did she know that that was true. She was just saying it just can't be. But it was in God's mind anyway, not for Abraham to have Ishmael, actually. But God deals with what he has. He doesn't force things to happen. He works with our decisions, which sometimes become consequences. Sometimes, according to God's will, they will become blessings. But he turns evil into what was meant for evil into good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. And this is what he's doing in this situation too. So God said to Abraham, be not displeased because of the boy and because of your slave woman, meaning Hagar and Ishmael. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you. For through you, and this is critical, for through Isaac shall your offspring be named. So it's not through Ishmael, it's going to be through Isaac. Islam is built upon, I would have to say lie, because it is, that it wasn't Isaac, it was Ishmael. The Bible makes it very clear. No, sorry, it's not Ishmael, it's Isaac. And this is where this consequential hostility or enemy begins to take shape. But God keeps his promise because Hagar is not in the story, wasn't intended to, but Ishmael is a product of unbelief and misdirection, but a consequence is he becomes a problem to Isaac soon after he's born. But God promises Abraham, do not fret. I will make a nation from the son of the slave woman also, because he is your offspring. So God cares about Ishmael. He cares about Hagar. And he doesn't want them to be without. And they prosper. He makes a great nation out of Ishmael, and it becomes far bigger than the nation of Israel. And so it says in verse 21 that he lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother, Hagar, took a wife for him from the land of Egypt, which is their origin. Now, from this point on, Egypt will become Israel's persistent enemy, even up to today. This hostility against the Jews from coming out of Egypt. Now, I'm not talking about Egyptians, but it's as a nation and a mentality, and what they're taught and instructed for generation to generation is that Israel is your enemy and cannot coexist with us. So this hostility against the Jews started back then, and it has yet to subside. In fact, the Muslim Brotherhood, and I'm sure you've heard of, is like the mother of Islamic terrorism in modern times, since Israel became a nation. Before Israel became a nation, the Muslim Brotherhood began its formation in the 1920s, I believe. So they've spread Islamic terrorism throughout the world, but especially in America and the West. So the point here is that God made it possible for Israel and her neighbors to live in their own lands and govern their own people without hostility. It was not according to his will. But the sons of Ishmael have never been content with that. So I want to continue with this story with my own sense of effect, in a way, my salvation. It's a strange concept, but in some ways, I could say that salvation, I came to faith without anyone preaching the gospel with me, anyone sharing the gospel with me. No one ever told me that Jesus was Jewish, that he was a Jewish Messiah. And so I was 29 years plus when I came to terms with Yeshua HaMashiach and was saved. I was not a believer, obviously, and I knew nothing about church life. but I got saved on my kitchen floor, which is another story. But it came through this haunting question, because as a Jewish boy growing up, I'm born in Brooklyn, my parents moved to Long Island to make a better home for their kids. It was also a way of hopefully removing themselves from the anti-Semitism, which was prevalent and growing in New York City, Brooklyn, where I was born. And these are things they never talked about. I would overhear conversations with aunts and uncles, and it was never directed to me, but I was curious and I would listen with both ears, even though, I never made sense out of it because I didn't know. Why are we hated? Why are we hated? I remember I wanted to play baseball so bad, and there was this little league thing going on in my neighborhood, and yet I wasn't allowed to play. And I didn't know why. I would nag, I want to play. And I was never really told, but I overheard my mother talking about these coaches, and their parents, they're anti-Semites and blah, blah, blah. And so I just got this sense of understanding that it wasn't for Jews. We don't do Little League. Same thing with Cub Scouts. I was in the Cub Scouts for, I think, 2 months, and I actually won a blueberry eating contest in this huge cafeteria where all the Cub Scouts had their hands tied behind their back, and whoever ate the blueberry pie with first was a winner, and I was one of the winners. And I thought, man, this Cub Scout thing is incredible. I love it. 2 months later, I had no more Cub Scouts, no more Cubby hat, and no more uniform. And I didn't know why, and I was never explained, but I understood through conversation on the way home that day, these anti-Semites are, something about them. They hate us, and they'll never accept us. So that was the end. So over me, I learned something that is something common to Jews all over America, and it's been that way all over the years of their history since Israel was expelled from Roman territory, which began in Israel under their control. So that is this, that over all the Jews, it's very unnoticeable, but very well known by Jews, even if they hide it, that there's, what a thought bubble is, right? It's this little thing over your head like cartoons used, and there'd be these 3 little circles coming out of the cloud, and inside the cloud was some kind of text. It was about thought. And so, by the way, you could check out our Einstein thought bubble segments on YouTube. But that said, there's 2 questions that are in the thought bubble, or 2 thought bubbles that every Jew walks around with. Picture this. One of them says, why are we hated still? And the other thought bubble says, when are they coming for us next time? So this is a synopsis of the history of the Jews from the time they were exiled from Israel into the nations. It's called diaspora, Hebrew galut. It's when they're living in foreign lands, the Jews were, for 19 plus centuries until the return, or aliyah, began mostly in the 1800s, mid-1800s, but there was always Jews living in Israel, but not in great number. The land was never void of Jews, but it was never owned and controlled without, any kind of legal standing with the nations. So this question is, when are they going to come through next? Because throughout the Jewish history, there was pauses in the persecution. So there was some times when Jews grew favor with their host country, but it would always end at a certain point, and they would be turned on and ultimately thrown out, to the point where the Jews were thrown out of every country in Europe specifically, and England, throughout all time. Now, sometimes they were forced out by the decision to either stay here. You could stay here and pay a tax, a very high tax, but first you'd have to be converted. And if you're not converted, then we would either kick you out or kill you. And that meant confiscation of property as well. They were not allowed to own property. They were not allowed to have businesses. When I say property, like personal property. They were not allowed to have businesses, go to the same schools. They had much restrictions all through time. They never had a nation of their own. So that question mark is over the head. Why do they hate us still? And there's, people come up with different reasons, but there's no accurate answer to that because it's spiritual in nature. So the question that Jews walk around with are these 2. Why we hate it so long, and when is the next time? Well, for me, I had this inner longing to know what is the meaning of life, because I looked around as I grow up in my teenage years. I didn't see this satisfying life amongst the adult world that I knew, and that was mainly Judaism. But then when I started meeting my Gentiles, which most of my friends were, especially going into junior high and high school, and occasionally I'd meet their parents, I didn't see this sense of happiness or fulfillment. And so I kind of dismissed it coming from what was familiar to me, which was Judaism. And we felt that the world was divided up into Jews, Catholics, and Protestants. So the Catholics and Protestants were all Christians, and then we were Jews. But none of them seemed to have satisfaction. So I dismissed Catholicism, Protestantism, and Judaism that I knew of from my family life. Not the family. I loved the family. We loved being together and all that. But the Jewish ritual and practices, to me, I saw no meaning in. So I started my quest. And it began, I'll do it in this very brief. It began hitchhiking. I wanted to, this is already, I'm in the 60s, late 60s, early 70s. And I'm hitchhiking. I'm hitchhiking everywhere. And it wasn't just to find the meaning of life, but I wanted to know the meaning of life. And I got very good at hitchhiking, was my way around anywhere of distance and even locally. And so I hitchhiked. I hitchhiked all over the Northeast, northern New York, came down, started hitchhiking to Florida and back, and then across the country, or the whole country, into the coast of California, up that coast, west, through Oregon and Washington, into Canada, up north in Canada into the Rockies, and then all across Canada, hitchhiking. And what was I looking for? Somebody. Just all I wanted was one person who knew the meaning of life. Now, as a hippie then, I was true. I was a Woodstock citizen. So to me, that was the lifestyle, but there's still lacking this meaning, this really deep sense of meaning. And so I made this whole trip. Long story short, it fell flat. I didn't find anyone who knew that meaning. And so I felt there must be communities somewhere in the world. Now, this is, there's a lapse of time. I build this truck out of a 52 Chevy and build a custom house, put it on the back of it, and start traveling across the world looking for a community, which would be a commune, that lived according to the meaning of life in community. Well, the same thing happened to me. I started traveling, went up north, New England, nothing, come back down, come down south, go follow the eastern seaboard, and all the way into Florida. But on the way down there, I stopped at communes, and I would stay there for a period of time. Usually it was just a short period of time, and I'd be frustrated because I never found the meaning of life. And then all through that, I'm still thinking, well, maybe I should just get married. And not my wife, Marla, now was my girlfriend, but she knew I had to leave because this was so important to me. And I was going to come back and tell her, I found it. I found the meaning of life and community, and we're going to do this, that, and the other thing. But it fell short. And there's a long story. I wrote a book about it called The Milkman Story. You could read it, but it's more about the pastor that showed me what the love of Yeshua was all about. So The Milkman Story. I also wrote another book called Inappropriate, which is a follow-up in much deeper biblical fashion. I recommend it. So I'm still got these two bubbles over my head. So I'm thinking there's got to be more to it. Maybe I just need to get married. So I asked in my very crude way for Marla, to marry her after we'd been living together for years other than through my journeys. And we did. And I thought maybe that's it. I just need to get married and we need to buy a little farmette and just us and a couple of goats, a couple of kids and a couple of calves and garden. That was it. We just lived there forever and be happily ever after. It didn't work. We didn't get that far. And then we did start having kids. And I thought, now I'll be satisfied. And it still wasn't. I loved my daughter. And then I had another one on the way. Marla was pregnant again. But it wasn't until I cried out in desperation that God revealed himself to me. And at that point, the bubbles began to break, both of them. So yes, I still knew that we were hated. And yes, I still knew that they were coming back for us one day, and that day has pretty much arrived, let me put it this way. But there's still Jews all over America that are walking around. They won't admit it. They may not recognize it, but there's a sense of sorrow and expectation that isn't a good one, that's lodged somewhere in their soul, that we're still hated, and one day they're going to come back for us again. Most Jews will say that's not true. I never thought like that. I will never think like that. And that's what they said in Germany and in Europe during the rise of Hitler. So here's my guess. My hope for you is perhaps one day you will get to know, if you don't already, a Jewish person, and by the love that you have for their Messiah, according to Romans 11, that you would provoke them to a jealousy because you also have a love for them. And they'd be like, where did you come from, you Christian? You're supposed to hate us or just want to get rid of us. And now they won't say that because they'll be polite, but somewhere that bubble is still over their head, following them wherever they are. But maybe you're the one Christian, one Gentile believer that loves Yeshua enough to get close enough to reveal his love to them and your love for them, for Israel and the people of God who are Israelis and Israelites, which are the Jews. And then the piercing love of Yeshua will break that bubble, and they can meet the Jewish Messiah who's on the other side of it, who longs to meet them. Consider that and let us know what you think. Shalom and much respect.
We bless you for taking the time to consider this message. May it cause you to be fruitful and effective and lead others along the way with confidence and determination. Check out our website at comfortmypeople.com to become better informed and equipped to restore righteousness to the people of Israel, America, and beyond. Please consider sharing this and visit us on social media. Shalom and blessings.